Hello and welcome to ATARC's Make Every Second Count When Recovering from Cyber Outages webinar. My name is Kirsten Patton and I have the pleasure of moderating today's webinar. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and ATARC is a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. ATARC provides ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. Thank you to our partners over at Veeam and Quamalo for helping us create today's event. Additionally, I would like to thank you all at home for joining us. We hope that you enjoy this informative session, and I would like to remind you that during the panel, there will be time for Q&A. So please place all of your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen during the panel, and we will be asking our panelists these questions throughout the discussion. I also want to remind you to answer the poll questions throughout the panel if you would like to be eligible to receive your CPE credits. With that, I would like to begin by a round of introductions from our panelists. If you all could please come on screen and come off mute, I'll have you all introduce yourself. Please share with us what agency you're with, what your role is there, and anything of relevance that you'd like our audience to know about you as it relates to this topic today up top. So if we could begin with Keith, please.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, depending on what time zones you're all in. My name is Keith Nargi. I am our Global Field CTO at Cumulo. For those of you who aren't aware of what Cumulo is, we are a next generation scale out NAS that is built to be a software system, not a proprietary hardware. Why that is very beneficial specifically to this topic is that a lot of companies invest in storage or file-based storage, and it's a lot of what government agencies and universities build their research on, and Cumulo stores all of that. Our difference is that we are software, not proprietary hardware. It's a lot easier to attack a hardware system because you know exactly what kind of kernel is being used, the operating system that's being used. We build a software stack that can run on a variety of different hardware platforms as well as in the cloud. We also take data security extremely high here at Cumulo. All of our systems are built using software-based encryption that cannot be turned off, and we've got a whole bunch of different things to protect your data built directly into our system. Just to give a quick background on me, I've been with Cumulo for about 7.5 years. I was a very early employee here at Cumulo, and I have a long background in software engineering, security, and enterprise workloads.
Thank you, Keith. And let's bounce over to Kenny next.
Good morning, everyone. So I am Lieutenant Commander Kenny Miltenberger. I am the Red and Blue Team Branch Chief here at Coast Guard Cyber Command. And so, as my world relates to this topic is I am the threat. So running the Red Team, we do adversary emulation on our own Coast Guard network systems, ships, boats, planes, in order to better secure them, to train our operators and train our defenders. So, and then my other side is the Blue Team side. We're not a blue team in the kind of industry sense of the word. We're a blue team in the DoD sense of the word. So we don't run the SOC. We conduct proactive, cooperative cybersecurity assessments. And so our kind of portfolio ranges from teams that go out and conduct on-site proactive cybersecurity assessments to enterprise endpoint scanning, web scanning, mobile app vetting, and kind of cooperative cloud assessments as well. So that's kind of where I stand in this, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right, let's jump over to Brian next.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Brian Merrick. I'm the Director of Cloud Programs for the Department of State. So basically I oversee a multi-public cloud environment that basically supports the majority of our posts overseas, as well as a lot of domestic use cases. So obviously we have a lot of integration work to do with cybersecurity. We also do enterprise application development. So we sort of eat our own dog food in terms of learning how to manage risk, especially around data and our environment. So I'm definitely looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Brian. And then Jeff, let's hear from you next.
Hi, thanks so much, Kirsten. My name is Jeff Reichard. I work on the product strategy team at Veeam Software. For those of you who don't know, Veeam is a leading enterprise backup software company. We've got about 1,400 active federal customers right now. And obviously, if we're having a conversation about keeping critical data safe, having good backups is a key part of that conversation. So I'm looking forward to the talk today very much.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. All right. So Kenny, let's start with you first. My question is around having a plan in place. So why is it so important for agencies to have a plan in place in order to respond to potential threats on critical data?
Oh, sorry, I got you a little broken there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, let me repeat it then. Why is it so important for agencies to have a plan in place in order to respond to potential threats on critical data? Oh no, I think he's frozen on my end, actually. Are you guys seeing that too? Okay.
Yep, afraid so.
All right, we'll give Kenny a minute to reconnect again. But all right, going down my list, Brian, can we start with you on this one?
Sure. So yeah, definitely in terms of managing risk, it's absolutely critical to have a plan in place. And before you even, get the mechanics in place, it's really important to understand the nature of your data. You can't protect all of it to the same level. I mean, just from a cost perspective, it's cost prohibitive. So really understanding what your core key data elements are, where they are, who's accessing them, and for what purposes. And then understanding those underlying platforms and environments they're operating in, and any of the connective boundary pieces that you have are really critical. And then certainly having a plan for incident response, whether it be to a cyber event or to an outage, is absolutely critical. And making sure that the business understands that, so that you're helping to manage those expectations between the security providers, the platform providers, and obviously the business owners. And without that plan, there really isn't a way to discuss those things and work through them. And then on top of that, obviously, it's great to have a plan, but you have to actually practice it. You got to do things. And we've run into a lot of issues just through the natural friction of doing real work in the real world. And by doing that and building those relationships and leveraging those existing plans, it really helps continually improve those processes and cross-talking. So definitely encourage folks to think about doing after-action reviews when there's an incident, making sure the key players involved talk about what went well, what didn't, what to change for next time. It really comes down to a lot of process improvement, continuous process improvement, and really having a transparent view into the state of your operation at any point in time.
And has your team, no matter how big or small the scale of that instance, do you guys do that every single time where you go back and you look at it again? And is there a particular example that you could share with us?
Yeah, so for instance, we were actually doing an enterprise application supporting the interagency during one of the recent crises we had last year. And so we believed, we got information through some sources to believe that we may have had an insider threat, a known person that had access to our environment that may have been sharing that data erroneously. And so we were able to run the traps in coordination with our security colleagues that had stepped up monitoring, as we knew this was a potential risk. So we had additional controls in place to identify some of these pieces. And then we actually worked through, the process elimination to see if that actually had occurred or not. Ended up it hadn't, but having those pieces in place made it possible to answer that question incredibly quickly, because it could have had a very negative impact to one of the department's key missions at the time. So really the lesson learned for us was it's worth, having those things set up ahead of time and really trying to anticipate, what erroneous actors could do, and then exercising that, and then actually going back and checking what well, what didn't. And we did actually find a couple of things to improve on in our process regardless. And so it was definitely worth having that in place.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And Kenny, I think we have you back now.
I have you. I'm so sorry. I literally cut out your mid question, but I think the question was, talk about the importance of having a plan for incident response. Am I getting that right?
Yes, you got it right. And also if there's been situations you've encountered where, maybe there wasn't a plan in place and you learn from that, or, past experience has showed you that this is what you could potentially expect. So any experiences you can share with us, please.
Certainly. So, having a plan is step zero in terms of cybersecurity. You really cannot wing it when it comes to what you're going to do during incident response. And so, some of the really important things you want to make sure you can do is make sure you can, remotely pull, memory from any box in your enterprise. Make sure you can actually do the basic tasks of restoring from backup. And so I think having a plan, step one, is really, really important, but then actually practicing and implementing that plan to make sure you can actually do what you think the plan says is just as important. And it's giving people that muscle memory and experience. So if you have people kind of sitting around on a watch floor, or running kind of incident response, and they're never really responding to or running that playbook, they're going to get stale, and they're not going to know to expect things, and things will come as a huge shock to them when it does happen. So having a plan is really important. Making sure people know that plan is really important. And then, people with proper training as well, but then exercise that plan regularly. And that's where, from our perspective, red teaming becomes really important. So, with red teaming, your incident responders aren't going to know that it's the red team. They're going to think you have an actual intrusion on your network that requires containment and isolation and recovery. And so, exercising that in the realest way possible is really, really effective. And so, I know that is put into practice a lot in the DoD. DoD has a whole construct around certifying red teams to perform this kind of activity. In the civilian federal government, not as much. It's kind of maybe more ad hoc. You have a pen testing team here, maybe there, maybe not. So I think that's something that, from federal civilian perspective, absolutely need to really start investigating and investing in. And so that in terms of real world experience, I think it just all comes down to, what are you going to do on the real day? And what are your people going to do? And do they have the right training? Make sure there's a ton of great incident response trainings out there. Not particularly endorsing any, but SANS GIAC, Certified Incident Handler, is a very popular one that teaches some great fundamentals. And really a core part of that course is understanding what adversaries are doing. So it's, the first module of that is, here's how you actually do forensics and stuff like that. But the rest is, well, how do you think the adversary know what they're going to do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Kenny. Keith and Jeff, is there anything that you would like to share on this topic, or things that resonate based on what our other panelists have said so far? Go ahead, Keith.
So, honestly, I completely agree with both of them. It's when you're a technology vendor, it's our responsibility to give customers who are leveraging our platforms the tools and best practices for how we feel they should go about implementing plans, and we hopefully guide our customers on what we think the best practices for using our platforms are. One of the things that Cumulo really does pride itself on is feedback from our customers. We love to listen. We write up security best practices around data governance and how to protect your data. At the end of the day, the data is the most important thing. For any number of government agencies, whether it's protecting the homeland or building the next, rocket, or anything that happens in between, that data that is gathered is hypercritical, and being able to protect and secure that is something that a storage vendor like Cumulo really has to pride itself on. And we pride ourselves on, we never lose data. But in order to make that claim, you have to really give your customers tools that they can use, test, validate, and it's also one of those things that cyber threats are never stagnant. They're constantly evolving, which means as a vendor, we constantly have to stay on top of what's happening in the world, what red teams are finding and what blue teams are actually doing to prevent those. We have to then go and constantly evolve our technologies to not say, well, we solved this problem 3 years ago, because the problem that was solved 3 years ago was also broken 6 months later. So we constantly have to stay on top of that. And it's our responsibility to ensure that our best practice guides and security documentation is always up to date. Just kind of like Brian said, it's a great thing to have a plan. And I think Ken said the same thing. That's step 0. Testing is also hypercritical, but evolving is the most important thing. As a vendor, we have to continually evolve our technologies that enterprises and governments are implementing to ensure that we can stake that claim that your data is never at risk.
Thank you, Keith. And Jeff, I want to open it up to you too, if there's anything additional you'd like to add here before we move on.
Yeah, absolutely. I really liked Brian's point that to make a good plan, you need to identify which data sets are most critical to your most critical missions and then work from there. It actually reminded me of a quote that Keith and I have probably used in our career over time that's usually attributed to Frederick the Great, which is he who defends everything defends nothing. So you need to figure out what your most critical assets are, and you need to make sure that you defend those. I'll also chime in with what Keith said a minute ago. There's a real convergence now between all kinds of data protection technologies, both enterprise storage and backup, and the security space. And there has to be, just because of the evolving nature of cyber threats. This is a quote that I had from a public sector IT leader in state and local government. He was talking specifically about what he was seeing around his agency trying to get cyber insurance. Not so much of an issue for Fed, but his points were valid. He said that he had been told by his insurance underwriters that there were 3 things that would help, that insurance companies have found completely lower the size of cyber insurance claims for private sector or public sector organizations that have that kind of insurance and make those claims. One of them is multi-factor authentication, kind of a no-brainer, I think, from everyone here on this call. Another one is immutable backups, which we might talk about more later on. But the third one is having an up-to-date and tested incident response plan and having different incident response plans for different kinds of threats. And I really heard that loudly, and it's something that Brian and that Kenny have echoed quite a bit in the comments that we've heard so far this morning.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to our first poll question. And we'll pop that up on the screen. I'll go ahead and read what it'll say. It's how ready is your agency to respond to potential threats on critical data? There you go. So please take a moment to respond to that poll question if you'd like to receive your CPE credit today. All right, and then moving on to our next round of questions. Brian, let's kick it off with you this time. My question is going to be around best practices and tools. So in your experience, could you please share what some of these best practices and tools are in order to, or that you would recommend to allow agencies to quickly regain the use of critical systems after a crisis strikes? So if you could be just more specific around those practices or tools that you've utilized in the past.
Yeah, I think there's a couple foundational elements. First, understanding what environments that you're dealing with in terms of that data. And by that, I mean, in terms of public cloud versus on-premise environments, they operate very differently, and you're generally going to use a lot of different tool sets. For instance, I mean, I had somebody, an auditor, ask me about my tape backups, and I was like, wow, haven't seen it take back up in a minute. So there's also in the cloud, there's also a contractual requirement that you need to think about in terms of recovery. So really, I mean, whether you mirror the environment, whether you put it in high availability storage or not, is a contractual issue that you need to think about as well. If you don't contract for it and pay for it, you're not going to have it. In addition, you also can't rely on just the cloud providers, security to take care of you entirely. You have to think about what's happening at your platform layer, at your workload layer, data layer, for that whole defense in depth look, and understand what they do and don't do. So, in civilian government, we really focus on FedRAMP compliance quite a bit, and that's a good like step zero. But you still have to understand, what is that provider giving you and what aren't they? So that's sort of creating that foundational knowledge. And then as you move into best practices with teams, making sure that you're building security in at the beginning. So we use agile approaches for all of our work, DevSecOps capabilities. So, the more that you can do your controls, especially in these platform environments as code, the better off you're going to be. And obviously trying to build security into your teams is important. So structurally, we've restructured our teams to have a security team member embedded in every product or platform team that then interfaces with a larger reach back team. So it's more than just the tech. You also have to have the people in the process, or you're not going to use the tech. It'll just sit there on the shelf. So really incorporating that best practice in, and making sure that you do automated checks as much as possible, automated testing, and then really have that cross collaboration between those teams, and also your incident response teams as well. So you build the security up front, you make sure you're managing that throughout the process, you keep those security controls in as code as much as possible, so they're easily reviewed and you can move to continuous assessment. And then you make sure that you're tying out those processes from an incident standpoint with the incident response team, and they have a good picture of the environment, right? And so in terms of tools, at least in terms of cloud, I can really speak to that most broadly. You're going to end up using a lot of cloud native tools in each separate environment. So, we have APaaS, SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS environments. They each operate a little differently. The IaaS environments are going to require a lot more work on the engineering side, and there are a lot more cross-cutting tools that you can use for those. When you move up the stack into more PaaS and SaaS environments, you have a lot less latitude to use third-party tools because of the nature of the proprietary nature of those environments. You have a lot less access to those backend environments by design. So you just have to factor that into your thinking in terms of what tool sets you're going to use based on the environments you're in. One thing we've seen a lot is a move into hybrid environments, which means you have a whole spread of things you have to pull together. So where we're seeing this actually going is trying to move away from just the detective controls and more of an emphasis on preventive controls. So that's going to mean really leveraging single identity providers, which we have and we're still rolling out. I mean, it's a never-ending process. Since there aren't really perimeters anymore, if you understand, who's getting at your data, that's going to help you know what to protect. And then having a cloud access security broker software is going to be really critical so that you can identify and put preventive controls in place. And actually you can separate internet connectivity from certain actors based on certain rule triggers. So that's really where we need to move up in terms of our fidelity, in terms of tooling, move out of the reactive mode and into the proactive mode. But to do that, you got to understand your process, your people, your data, what you're doing it for, what those risk tolerances are, and the parameters around how people use it. So, for instance, you wouldn't want to set a control in place to, flag everybody that accesses your environment after hours if you have overseas around the clock. Wouldn't do any good. So those kind of common sense things you really want to think about in terms of how you address the tooling and the rules and the use of those pieces to come together to really generate that cyber outcome.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Now, opening it up to the rest of our panelists, what are some other best practices that you can share with us? Kenny, go for it.
So I just want to kind of build on a point Brian said that I really liked, is talking about, cloud and FedRAMP. And we put a lot of focus on FedRAMP, that the FedRAMP's going to protect us. It's not going to protect us from ourselves, right? And so another point he made was kind of the automation piece. So, you get the tools to protect yourself, but it's not going to protect you from making bad decisions of how you configure your cloud environment, how you protect your credentials, and how you manage all the security logs and data within your kind of multiple instantiations of your cloud. And so automation is a huge part of that, and making sure, like Brian said, building in a lot of those security configurations automatically, because if you're, for each instance of your cloud environment, if you're individually configuring your logging, your security controls, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make it really hard to make changes. It's just not scalable at all. So it's a one thing. Okay, cloud is great. To be in a FedRAMP cloud is even better, but you still need the skills and awareness to correctly cover that. You can, when the incident does come, you can actually do something about it, and you're not just kind of scrambling through like 28 different AWS instantiations because your logs aren't aggregating or something like that. So, that's one thing I would say. The other thing is talking about a little more endpoint, maybe a little more preventative. And from a red team point of view, they're no longer a joke, right? So like certain antiviruses, back in the day, you'd be like, oh, that's, you can evade that, no problem, right? Simple signature-based detection algorithms, very easy to bypass and avoid. However, there are a lot of great tools right now out there, and again, not an endorsement, just things I'm aware of, like Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, CrowdStrike, probably a lot more that do a lot of behavioral stuff. Huge pain for red teams, right? So when you start looking at that kind of behavior, for example, if I land on one of your machines as an adversary and I type in the "who am I" command, how many normal users, when you log on to your workstation, open a command line and say, "Who am I?" Basically nobody. You know what I mean? Like, only as an adversary I want to know who I am on your machine, if I want to know that. And so there's nothing inherently wrong with that command, even if I have legitimate access, but that should probably tip or cue some kind of investigation, and just maybe using that command. But just as a little microcosm of something that how far those solutions have evolved, and including the ability to, like I said before, remotely conduct forensics. If you're in a position where you need to ship a hard drive across country, you're losing days. It's not good enough anymore. So that's basically some of the best practices I've observed as well.
Yeah, thank you, Kenny. And then I also want to open it up to Jeff and Keith if you guys have anything else you'd like to expand upon for this question.
Sure. So there was the RSA conference was last week, and one of the talks that I heard at it that really interested me around best practices was an analysis by a couple of executives from CrowdStrike and Mandiant of how the Russian cyber attack on the Viasat satellite network in Europe, which happened 1 hour before the invasion of Ukraine began, was headed off. And the conclusion of these two security executives was that Ukraine has gotten really, really good at resiliency for critical data. And they've gotten really good at backups, because basically after the network was nuked, they brought it back from backups in very short time. And it's the largest attack of this sort, at least according to these two executives at the RSA conference last week, one of the largest that's ever been done. And it had basically no effect on communications abilities because of painful experience. The targeted networks had gotten really good at having secure backups and being able to restore from those. So I was really interested in that. Brian's point about the way that we need to think about the differences between on-prem and cloud data protection also really resonated with me. Veeam does a lot of independent research of our own. We actually do the largest survey every year, and have done for the past 3 years, ever done by anyone, including industry analyst firms, about what's going on with enterprise data protection, both for public sector and for private sector agencies. And while I think in the past, federal government level agencies have kind of gotten a knock for maybe being behind on cloud adoption or behind on adoption of new technologies. Our research shows that's absolutely not the case. Specifically to Brian's point about hybrid environments, the adoption of infrastructure as a service, so things that look like servers, federal government at this point in terms of workloads is about 49% up in cloud providers, and then about evenly, 25, 26% for on-prem virtual machines and physical servers. So you definitely have to be thinking about what the difference is between workloads up in the cloud versus workloads on-prem. You especially need to think about that because, and again, to piggyback on Brian's point, people sometimes lose sight of what they're actually still responsible for when they move workloads up to the cloud. Anyone who's been trained as an administrator in Azure, AWS, other cloud services has had to sign off on something called a shared responsibility model, that they understand it. But basically, what any of the very secure, excellent hyperscale cloud providers out there remind you when you're learning to administer your services up in those clouds is that they have a lot of responsibilities around infrastructure security, around physical security, around keeping things up to date. But ultimately, it's your responsibility to understand what your most critical mission data is and to protect that. And in fact, the SLAs that you get from cloud service providers reflect that, because the SLA remedies, if something goes wrong, are not around paying you remedies for lost data. They're around paying you remedies for downtime. And ultimately, cloud providers are really clear that you need to have backup for your workloads that are up there so that you can always keep access to your data. I also really liked the point that Keith made that while making sure that your service that's up in the cloud is FedRAMP compliant, that won't protect us from ourselves. I think anyone who's been in this business for a while has seen, specifically around things like data breaches, the most expensive in terms of regulatory remedies, in terms of fines, data breaches that have been out there have been for unsecured cloud resources. You think a few years back, things like the British Airways or the Marriott data breaches that happened, those were buckets of data that were sitting up in cloud providers that had not been properly secured, and bad guys could basically just walk in and get them. So we definitely want automation, and we definitely want to remember what our responsibilities are around protecting data wherever it is, especially since it's about evenly split between on-prem and the cloud now for federal agencies.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that response. Keith, go ahead.
Sure. So I kind of have to just say that I agree with what everybody has already said. So I'm not going to belabor the topic, but as a vendor, I think it's really important for us, especially Cumulo, because we are a major player in both all three of the major clouds, Azure, AWS, and Google, as well as being able to give customers the ability to run on-prem. So we are a hybrid provider. It's really important for us to provide our customers, government agencies, state and local, the tools that will allow them to run in any environment. It's really easy for a cloud provider to build a product and have a native backup. Just thinking AWS has AWS backup as a service, and they have tons of different tools that hook into the compute layer, to the block layer, to the storage layer, to the database layer. That's great. It's a native service. But like if I'm running my data in both on-prem and in the cloud as a hybrid service, I have different tools that I need to be able to use to secure and alert and kind of do this predictive analysis against potential threats. And on-prem is going to be very different than the cloud. So when we start thinking about that, we have to give extensibility to our product that enables customers to implement and secure their data and alert on that in two very different environments. And that's one of the key things that we as a vendor try and do, is ensure that your best practices on-prem for data recovery have to be as close to what they are in the cloud, but there's going to be subtle nuanced things that are different. And our ability to build tools that work with cloud native products, like an AWS CloudWatch or Azure Sentinel, all of those are very valuable, but then they have to also work on-prem with potential tools that you've got like Sumo Logic or Netrix or any of these observability tools that are on-prem. That is very important because each each incident plan or best business continuity plan or data recovery plan is going to have different tools in different locations, and the extensibility of a vendor's product to ensure that while it may be different tools, the end result is still the same. And with a product like Cumulo, where we are constantly tracking in real time, IOPS, throughput, client activity, things like that, you need to be able to take that real time and put it into an observability tool that can react and alert on it. And we need to ensure that our end users, folks like Kenneth and Brian, are able to take these tools that they're going to implement in both on-prem locations and cloud and guarantee that they get the same results, irrespective of the tool that they've used in any of those locations.
Thank you, Keith. All right, so moving on to our next question. Kenny, I want to start with you this time. I think I made a mistake before and we started with you last time. What challenges should be anticipated when creating and implementing a recovery plan? And also, what solutions have you seen be effective in overcoming these challenges? So you touched on it slightly earlier, but if you could go into it a little bit more this time.
Sure. So I think challenges is always going to be the human in the loop. Any process that requires the manual intervention and kind of regular activity is going to be really hard. So little story, and I know Jeff and Keith being backup guys will probably love this. So, statute of limitations about 10 years ago, I was on my ship and the EXO executive officer deleted his personnel tracker spreadsheet, like the most important spreadsheet you can possibly have as an executive officer on a ship, like what everyone is doing, what the ship's doing, really important. Got deleted. So, I think I was running the IT systems, or I was kind of in charge, but I was an ensign, so, very junior officer. And so we said, okay, we'll just restore from backups. We had daily tape backups that, presumably were going all the time. And so we went to restore to learn that, we hadn't backed up anything in 3 months. Whoops. It might have been longer than that, but a really long time. And so, that was entirely a human in the loop problem. Had nothing to do with our appliance, had nothing to do with our storage. It had to do with our ability to configure, check, and, routinely, restore from backups and develop that muscle memory. So I think, and there was no adversary. We're our own adversary in that case, right? So, I think that's the human in the loop is always going to be really, really challenging. And so the easier you can make that, the better. Mm-hmm. Another kind of thing is we talked about those observability solutions, maybe your SIEM tool or something like that. The less you have, the better. You don't want to have to train your operators to look at 6 different panes of glass depending on, oh, is this Google Cloud, AWS, am I on-prem? Am I on-prem here? Am I this network? Am I that network? You add a lot of complexity. And so, multiple panes of glass is fine. But, there is a point where there's a bit of saturation there and you might end up missing stuff or have kind of competency issues with certain sets of tools. And so that all kind of boils back to, your human in the loop. And so you want to automate as much as possible. And then you want to train your people and give them the tools to succeed, because people are really smart. They just need the tools for success there. And then kind of forcing those functions, forcing that muscle development is incredibly important. Just making sure things are working the way you think they're working. So I would say that's probably maybe one of the biggest challenges we have. And I think, it also comes back to, example of human in the loops, nothing to do with cybersecurity. Happened to read a bunch of books on nuclear power. And, most major incidents in nuclear power were due to humans turning off emergency reactor cooling. Literally, the machine knew the right thing to do. And he was like, no, I know better. So, I think the training is really important there. And, again, the automation as well.
Thank you, Kenny. And do any of our other panelists have a story they'd like to share? Or a challenge that go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to echo what Kenny was saying. I mean, it really is a people challenge. We had one incident where there was some data lost, and everyone had assumed that we had backups going back 6 months. Didn't. Backups only went back maybe a month because somebody somewhere in the chain just decided to make that decision without telling anyone. Don't even understand why, to tell you the truth. And so we really learned from that. It's like you have to think through the entire human dynamic of what's going on at any point in time and make sure that everyone's communicating and tying out. And really what we ended up doing was really going to tabletop exercises in more detail. And that helped to really exercise, and we expanded that out. I mean, yeah, we were always doing it, but I mean, we expanded that out to other groups that hadn't traditionally been involved, that, hey, you need to think about this too. So you need to understand when you just decide to, cut off the backups because, I don't know, you didn't want to buy more storage, what that means when there's recovery event that needs to happen. So, that definitely, I think, helps quite a bit. But yeah, the human in the loop is huge. So, I mean, I tell my guys all the time, and, it's a constant struggle and a never-ending journey. But really, we're trying to get to where we let machines do what machines do and humans do what humans do. Humans should be making decisions based on data coming from machines. But if a machine can do it, we should be automating it. And that's a constant struggle, especially in government where we use a lot of contract labor. It's definitely a change management challenge, but it's something that we keep trying to move down that direction. And where we have been successful, it's really been helpful.
Thank you, Brian. Is there anything additional Jeff or Keith would like to contribute? Go ahead, Keith.
I'll just take a real quick pass on this. It's more around what we kind of help our end users with. And when you think about this, it's really about, in the cyber world, it's defend, detect, recover, resume, like the 2D, 2R strategy. And it's how do you give the right tools to do that? We look at it from the perspective, we're a primary storage platform. Most if not all file data that our customers have is landing on our systems. And that's a lot of data, a lot of information to store and give to a single vendor. So you have to give them multiple ways to defend against an attack and to detect against an attack. And we have those built directly into our systems. But more importantly is, what do you do when you have to recover, right? So I know I have a problem, I know where it's coming from. Now it's recover. How fast can I get back to a steady state? And there's two ways of doing this. It's on-box local, where you can quickly recover away, whether it be a local snapshot, or is it more of a longer thing where you have to go from your original to your target? And that's a little bit more labor intensive, and it involves having to cut over between site A and site B. But if you can guarantee a fresh cut of data that hasn't been altered or hasn't been manipulated, and government agencies don't pay ransoms. So you have to be able to ensure that it was only a read-only version that hasn't been touched and is immutable. There's a lot of different tools that a data company like Cumulo has to ensure that we give to customers, so that the man and the person doesn't have to make the decision. You've got a machine actually showing you where your threat is coming from, how to defend against it, and how to recover away, and ultimately resume your business operations. That's how we look at it as a storage company: is, do we have the tools to defend? Do we have the tools to detect? But more importantly, if the 2Ds are hit, how do we recover and how do we resume? And those tools are really valuable when you're building a product that has local and distant recovery. And those are what we have to, as a vendor and a software company, build and easily document how they can be implemented for our enterprise and government agencies.
Thank you, Keith. And Jeff, did you want to add anything?
I'll just piggyback on a couple of points that we heard just now. Brian's story and Kenny's story about not being able to recover because people assumed that they had longer backup retention or backups at all for data. I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've heard more of those stories than I could repeat. So it's very common. But Brian's point in particular, that someone made a decision without talking to the other stakeholders, that is a really common problem. I've seen repeatedly with federal agencies, IT operations teams basically not being given feedback from the actual mission owners about what data is the most critical and how long it needs to be retained. And conversely, mission owners assuming that their requirements are understood by IT operations teams when they haven't taken the time to vet that and confirm that. I'll refer again to some recent Veeam research. We actually do both a research project on data protection trends, and we do a ransomware specific research project. Ours wrapped up this spring for 2022. We released it at our big Veeam On conference last month. And one of the questions that we asked 1,000 organizations that had been hit by ransomware worldwide was, where do you think you are in terms of alignment between your IT operations teams who are running backups, who are running the infrastructure, and your security teams who are running the security side of the house? And 51% said that they either need a drastic overhaul or a significant overhaul of coordination between those groups because they're not talking to each other as much as they need to, which if you think about, again, from Veeam's research, when ransomware specifically attacks an organization, 94% of the time backups are attacked. So if my security team does not have a really clear idea what is happening to make backups immutable, and Keith has talked about the solutions Cumulo has for that. Veeam has very good solutions around making backups unchangeable, even by an adversary who's been on the network for weeks or months and has admin passwords. It's really important that you get this handshake between your IT operations team and your security team so that you're not left unable to restore things or finding that the adversary has deleted some critical data and that the mission can't continue the way we need it to. I'll just point out one more stat, which kind of highlights the real necessity of making sure that you've got that coordination in place. This is from the Data Protection Trends Report. On average, after a ransomware attack, organizations, and this is over 3,000 organizations worldwide that were surveyed, about 3,400. After a ransomware attack, on average, organizations were able to recover only 64% of their data. And this is true whether or not they paid a ransom. And as we know, federal agencies don't pay ransoms, but 64%. So it's really important, if secure backup is your last line of defense, that your IT team and your security team are talking to each other and they know what the actual capabilities you've got deployed are.
Thank you, Jeff. Go ahead, Kenny.
Here's yeah, if I can, since we're still talking backup and ransomware, I really love bringing up ransomware because as Jeff mentioned, federal agencies don't pay ransomware. Personally, I'm not aware of the last time a ransomware attack hit our federal government that's disclosed. But look at Costa Rica recently in the news where that has become a real thing. So not just saying Kenny Miltenberger's hot take is like it's probably coming. It's probably coming to a federal agency near you, right? So you have to be prepared. And you as the agency is the only one who's going to protect yourself from that and can do those kind of proper backups and tests. That's not something that a team from CISA is just going to magic and beat that for you. So I just like the preparedness piece and just wanted to echo that.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's pop up our second poll question, I believe it is. Do you have effective solutions in place at your agency to overcome the challenge faced when implementing a recovery plan? Please go ahead and respond to that. And as a reminder, if you have any burning questions you'd like me to ask our panelists, please send those in now before we run out of time. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask our final question, having to do with preparedness, of course, but how often do these plans need to be revisited and updated? So if y'all could speak to your experience on how often you revisit, update, revise, etc., please share with us that now.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, we have an annual requirement, but really it's whenever there's a significant mission change for us, we revisit that. So for instance, when we're doing a major new activity on one of our platforms or an application that we think especially gets some nation state actor interest, we run the traps again, just to be sure, especially if we're doing interagency work. So it's really sort of a judgment call in terms of that, but it's really about looking at it through the perspective of risk-based decision making. So if you have major changes or maybe you had major turnover in your organization or changes in stakeholders, whatever it might not just be the technology, or it could be that you just rolled out new tooling. You'll want to go revisit that, run the traps again, and make sure that you've got everything squared away.
Thank you. Kenny, you can respond to that, but also know that there's a question specific to you in our chat about your experience, your favorite log retention period.
Oh, let's see. So I guess I'll answer first the how often you exercise. So annual, I think, is great, especially for a bare minimum. And to echo, it's a great time to do it when you adopt new security tooling. Have it as part of your process for tool adoption for your security stack is, let's run a drill, let's run a red team event. When we get a new EDR solution, how do I conduct forensics? Or maybe a new SIEM solution. Can my people effectively search logs, aggregate the information they need, or new backup solution, right? So every time that's going to change, and if you're not really careful, if you don't build that into your own agency process, you're going to have tactics, tools, and procedures that are out of date when you're adopting new technology. So ideally you're at a steady state where you have your security stack that isn't changing. But if any agencies like us, we have a lot of evolution in our tool set, positive evolution for us, but it's about keeping up with that. So I think running through that, building that maybe incident response process as part of your new tool adoption can be a really, really effective thing there. And so then for log retention policy, so 90 days as a recommendation, that's a pretty good log retention time. I probably couldn't provide too many more comments on what's good or bad, but really what you're thinking about for logging is what's the delta between my detection and when the actual initial intrusion occurred, and you want to be able to span that time. And so in many cases, what we've seen in the federal government, let's say like the OPM hack from a long time ago, how long did it take them to realize that the data was stolen and exfiltrated? I think it was 6 months, a year. So again, it comes down to a risk-based decision, because obviously you're driving a ton of cost with log storage that's that long. Maybe you prioritize what you're storing logs on, is another way to approach it. And again, that comes down to criticality of systems. What's your most important thing? What's worth keeping, your very long logs are? It's probably not, I don't know, the application for employee of the month club, we can probably stand to lose a couple weeks on that, but maybe it's your, privileged access management or something like that. So that's my kind of wishy-washy answer on log retention.
Thank you, Kenny. And then Jeff or Keith, do you have any response to the initial question, which was around revisiting and updating plans?
Well, I just have one. Having been doing this for a while, it used to be that in many sectors, both Kenny and Brian mentioned annual tests being a bare minimum. It used to be that the annual DR test or the annual resiliency test was get the tapes, go to your offsite testing center, have the exercise fail just like it failed the year before, and then rinse and repeat next year, right? That's the way that it went. And it went like that every single year.
That's funny.
So the answer is, if there's any way you can do it, preferably leveraging automation, and there's a lot of tools out there. Veeam has some tools like this. Make it not monolithic, make it automated, and make it frequent. If you have to get all of the stakeholders together to do a big monolithic test, it's going to be painful. You're going to have lots of friction with the process. So make it segmented, don't make it monolithic, and do it frequently if there's any way you can.
Thanks, Jeff. And Keith?
I actually 100% agree with Jeff. We give our customers, local data protection and as well as remote data protection with our storage systems. Local, honestly, is how fast can you recover a snapshot. The retention on those is really, it's up to each individual agency or enterprise to choose. So we have to give that ability to have as granular levels of snapshots as possible. And, to the point, it can't be monolithic. It's not entire system wide. It's on a per directory basis or top level directory or individual folder. Being able to have a snapshot taken every minute, every day, every hour, and pick your rotation of those. How long do you want them to automatically expire from? That's something that we obviously have to do. And I think the question was like a really good one about logs and retention. Each individual company and enterprise and agency we talk to has very different retention policies. We do a lot of storage work for video surveillance, and you'd be surprised how often video surveillance is kept for like 30 days, and then they're like, we don't have that anymore because it was automatically deleted. But we have a snapshot that we kept for this many days, and we can recover something, and then it gets a forensic lock based on the software. So giving that granularity is really, really valuable. I think everything else people have already said is something that Cumulo really holds true. It's up to each individual customer, and the automation piece of the failover, failback is got to be there. Software as code and infrastructure as code and implementation as code is all something that you've got to be able to do. If a process is 10 manual steps, there's a pretty good chance 3 of those manual steps are going to get either missed or executed improperly. So being able to have a push button that's the only manual step that you cannot mess up is extremely important. And I think vendors like Cumulo and Veeam, we've done a really good job of making it as foolproof as possible.
Thank you all. So that ends our portion of the webinar for questions, because we're almost out of time here. If we could please pop up our third and final poll question for our audience to respond. How often do you think that these plans should be revisited? And then last, in a matter of about 30 seconds or less, we've covered a lot of ground, but if there's just one key thing that you want our audience to walk away with a better understanding of, you think is the most important that we've discussed throughout this discussion, what would that be? And that'll close us out for our webinar today. But let's start with Jeff this time, please.
I'll make it quick. We've covered a lot of good points, but I will just say, since the topic of the webinar is protecting critical agency data and backups are your last line of defense, it's really important to make sure that you have backups that even someone who's been on your network for 6 months, like in the OPM attack and has escalated privileges, can't delete, so that you always have the option of getting data back. And thanks so much to everybody, Kenny, Brian in particular, from the government for your time today. It's really been fun to listen to.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. All right, Keith, you go next.
I want to echo Jeff's thoughts. Brian and Kenny, it was awesome listening to you guys talk about what you both do, what your teams are doing. Brian, very interested in a lot of the cloud stuff that you were talking about, as Cumulo is really working hard to bring file services to the cloud across all major cloud providers. I'm going to leave any of you who have not really heard of Cumulo. I would highly recommend going to check out Cumulo's website, specifically on task with what we've been talking about today. We have a solution called RecoverQ, where we go into a lot of details around how Cumulo can help you protect your very valuable data. And I just want to also say thank you very much for having myself and Cumulo represented here. It's been an honor to talk with all of you and listen to Brian and Kenneth.
Thank you, Keith. All right, let's jump over to Brian next.
Yeah, I mean, I think just at a high level, know what data is critical. know what you're trying to protect, and make sure you got the talent, the teams, and the structure and the process and the tools to be able to recover quickly and get back into operations.
Thanks, Brian. And Kenny, we'll end with you.
Sure thing. So again, since I'm insanely biased, recommend implementing red teams on your network, at least an annual assessment or something like that. And again, that's really putting into practice the entire cycle of your incident response and testing your tool stack, testing your defenders, so plans and policy, great. When the rubber meets the road, what are you going to do? Especially if you're an agency that hasn't been tested and you really haven't experienced a breach or something like that. Really important for you to actually see what's going to happen. Do your tools act like they're supposed to? Do your processes work? Can you recover in the way you think you can? And so red teaming is also a really valuable tool for building business cases, because you can demonstrate the operational impact of an adversary intrusion, especially if you're in an agency that maybe has less security focus or has other priorities. Like everyone's kind of chomping at the bit, zero-sum game for budget, right? So telling the story is really important, and red teaming is a really effective way to do that. Say, hey, we got into XYZ. We were able to, we could have done affected the agency's core mission, the business's core mission in these ways. And that can also be a more effective strategy. Say, hey, we actually need better backup. We were able to, access our backups and do this kind of thing. The red team was able to modify or whatever. That can be a really effective way to help tell that story and get that budget. And again, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure with everybody.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. Thank you to our panelists and also to our partners at Veeam and Kumolo for partnering with us today. I want to thank you all at home for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next event, of course. So before we go, please fill out this last poll question in order to ensure that you receive your CPE certification for attending today's session. And again, if you're interested in our next webinar on June 16th, we'll be discussing the rise of phishing resistant MFA, how we got here, and how we plan to move forward. So looking forward to that one, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Thanks.